Looks like a bunch of familiar faces on Monday.
On our recording.
Hi.
I'm going to stop sharing for a few minutes so that we can see everybody. Oh, there's Mark's arm back there in the corner.
There he is, my little hand on a stick.
It's really just an arm, isn't it? And it just waves once in a while on a timer. How's the weather?
No.
Barbara, Mark is social distancing in your house. Is that how that works?
Yes, he is. Yes, always behind me as well.
That's right, Barbara. He's always behind you.
Kenya, how are you? As long as it's not 6 feet under.
Hello, Kenya.
Hi.
Hi, Sherry.
Hi, Barb.
Gail.
Hi. And I will need to drop off at right on time because I have another Zoom meeting. So
Worried.
We have a lot of nerve. Okay.
yeah, I know.
All right then. How about if we get going?
Good.
Yay.
I do believe that this is our last session of Haredim. And we've done a little bit of history, European history coming into Israel, the establishment of ultra-Orthodox parties within the Knesset, within the politics, and the establishment also, or the continuation really, of the Rabbinate from the Ottoman period millet system. And we did some internal issues of, let's see, Shabbat and IDF service, Kashrut, which started moving out, and moved in last week to personal issues of marriage, divorce, conversion, I'm counting on my fingers, and touched on burial. Didn't really talk about that so much because it's really the same conversation. Which means, finally, this week, we get to get into a little bit of those issues that are much more in your news. They were in our news this morning. Today is the first day of Rosh Chodesh Av, wrong month, which means, first day? Yes, first day. Which means the Women of the Wall were down at the hotel today, so when we get down there to that section, we'll talk about that. But looking mostly at stuff surrounding prayer. As one of those things that, like kashrut, these are something that on a day-to-day basis we can be integrated and interactive with, as opposed to conversion, which is in theory a one-time thing, or marriage, in theory, a one-time thing. 100 years ago, it was a one-time thing. And so IDF service, again, those are all kind of one-time things, but prayer, kashrut, those are ongoing issues that could affect us. Wow, Kathy just walked out of the Aurora there. That was pretty cool. That can affect us on a much bigger basis. So we are going to, as you can see, start with women and prayer. So just kind of the concept of women in prayer, just as background. This conversation has been going on for 1,000 years at least. And we have texts that are even older than that, which talk about individual women and prayer, or tefillin and talit, the wearing of tefillin and talit, the most famous being Ruria, who is buried with her husband up in Tiberias, and she taught Talmud, she wore tefillin, she wore talit, she prayed every day. She did not pray in a minyan, so that is a separate issue, but this conversation is not a new conversation that's been going on. So it comes down to really that there are 4 basic issues when we talk about either a mixed minyan or a woman's minyan. In a mixed minyan, the idea of kol isha, the voice of a woman, is a problem. Obligation, chiyuv, because a woman is not obligated to pray 3 times a day at a set time. She's obligated to pray, but not bizman, this concept of at a specific time. Kavod tzibur is the honor of the community. Is it honoring the community or embarrassing to the community? for a woman to lead prayer, to lane Torah, whatever it might be, and can she be counted as a minion? And those are the places that it kind of, the conversation zooms back down into when you get into the details. So this is actually a picture from the 1800s, and there are many, many pictures like this at the Western Wall. And if you look at it, you can see, there's no mechitza. That is a modern invention at the Western Wall, modern as in post-1967. And women and men are both there davening. Really, up until 1967, the Western Wall was used if you wanted to get pregnant, or there was a really big drought year, or something like that. It was not somewhere that people would go every single day and pray. It was for desperate prayers, if you will. So even seeing this many people at the Western Wall is pretty significant. Most of the pictures have half this many people davening there. In 1967, we come back in. This is a famous picture of Rabbi Shlomo Goren, who blows the shofar on the Temple Mount, as well as this particular picture is at the Western Wall. You can see he's also carrying a Sefer Torah. And for the first time in 2,000 years, we have a shofar blown at the Western Wall. And he actually didn't necessarily have an issue with women creating a minyan. He was the chief rabbi of the Israeli military in 1974. Progressive Judaism has barely put a toe in the country, much less anything else. And he said, although women are not obligated, if they choose to get together, just 10 women, not mixed, and do all of those rituals, all of those prayers and such, which require a minyan, he didn't have a problem with it. And there's a lot of evidence that the very first rabbi of the wall, because the wall was turned into a synagogue very shortly after 67, that the rabbi of the wall, I'm blanking on his name for a moment, also didn't have an issue necessarily with women in prayer, women wearing talitot. Tefillin is a little bit different. Tefillin really has a masculine feel, much more than the talit does for most people. And it seems like that was part of the conversation that was going on. So just again, it's a conversation that has been going on for 2,000 years. Certainly for the last 1,000 years, there's a conversation about women making a minyan and doing that. And it continues today. This is Women of the Wall. This is not today's picture of Women of the Wall, but I'm going to come back to them a little bit later to do that. So we have women around the world who have really challenged these four concepts. Kol Isha, the voice of a woman, is actually an interesting thing. Because what does God say to Abraham when Sarah says, send out Hagar and Ishmael? Remember?
He says, listen to the voice of Sarah.
That's right. Here's an example of God saying, listen to her voice. Now, she's not singing, but you're being told to listen to her voice. But already by Talmud, so already if you assume that Abraham is 3,500 years ago, Talmud is 1,800 years ago, between that and 1,600 years ago, already by Talmud, this concept of the woman's voice is very sweet and enticing and all of this, and there's a fear that men will be distracted from prayer. And that's really what it is. I was at a Hartman session this week that I was taking, and the entire hour and 15 minutes was texts about men, and these are like well-known rabbis, big rabbis of the Talmud, who couldn't control themselves. And, in some cases, it was blamed on Satan, that it was really him in the guise of a woman. And in some places, the man actually was able to stop. But this kind of ongoing conversation of it can't happen. In our world today, that's a really hard conversation to have. I'm looking. There are mostly women on this. There are more women here, I think. Actually, we're pretty even, half and half. But I know for me, personally, to say I have to shut up because a man might be attracted to me, it's like, well, thanks for the compliment, first of all. I appreciate that. But you know what? Then walk away. Not my issue. It's your issue. But remembering that text was written by men. And the men were there to protect their power. It's no different than any other power structure that we can run into in the world today. They wanted to protect their power. And just like the conversation with the ultra-Orthodox, whether it's protecting their power, protecting their way of Judaism, we by default try to protect ourselves. That's just who we are. That's human nature, is you protect yourself, your way of life, your family. Hold 1 second, I have to turn the fan on before I start schwitzing in front of you. So it's a longer conversation. So just as a kind of background information, Asneta was in the 1500s. She's actually Kurdish. And she is considered to be the very first woman rabbi by some scholars. Okay, 1500s. Or you can go to the 1800s, and we're moving into Europe. Hannah was a Hasidic rabbi. So not just a rabbi, but a rabbi in the Hasidic movement. And the only one in history that would hold that position. A little bit more recently, Regina Jones is really considered to be the first modern female rabbi. She was in Germany. And then we have the people that really we are more familiar with. Sally Priesand was the first in the Reform movement. Sasso, Reconstructionist, Eilberg, Conservative. And Sarah Horvitz was really the first. She's different. She's not called a rabbi. She's called a Maharat. A Maharat is an expert in something. And that is what started happening in Israel when Orthodox women wanted to learn more Torah. They wanted to be in a position similar to the rabbis. So they studied at Orthodox places or with individual Orthodox rabbis. She studied with Rabbi Weiss specifically. And when they had mastered the appropriate material, they were called a Maharat. Now she learned things like menstruation issues and kashrut issues, women's issues, if you will, and health. She did a lot of health stuff, and what does halakha say about health? So she was limited, whether by her own choice or external choice, to kind of these women's issues. Today in Israel, she would be called a rabbah. In fact, we had a building meeting yesterday, and they were discussing whether I should be a rabbah, a rav, or a rabbanit. I'm like, how about Hannah? It really works just fine for me. So today in Israel, to hear Rabban, we have plenty of now Orthodox women who are receiving ordination in the same way that men are receiving ordination. So it's something which has been kind of building up, that women are moving. Marv, did you have a question? Oh, you're not, okay. Not talking to me. To be a rabbi, to lead services, which is one of your jobs as a rabbi potentially, means that you cannot have the issue of any of those 4 places. You can't have an issue of kol isha, of a woman's voice, because you're up there singing. You can't have an issue of obligation, and I'll spell that out in just a second, because you're up there leading, et cetera, et cetera. And they really led the movement to not only Women of the Wall, I'm going to come back to them, but Shira Chadashah. Has anybody been to Shira Chadashah in Jerusalem? So Shira Chadashah calls themselves an Orthodox synagogue, although sometimes they say we're non-associated, but they're an Orthodox synagogue by practice. What they daven, how they daven, when they meet, et cetera, et cetera. And in 2002, so close to 20 years ago, they were really the forefront of what you could call an egalitarian Orthodox minyan. And they said, well, what are the issues? Let's go to those 4 issues. Woman can't be part of a minyan. Okay, fine. We can't go back to the text and really get rid of that one. That one is very problematic to get rid of textually. So we're going to say you have to have 10 men and 10 women. In fact, right now in Israel, you can only have 19 people for services. So Shir Chadashah is not meeting because they require a minimum of 20 people before they start services. That was how they dealt with that one. The concept of chiyuv, if I am obligated to something, prayer 3 times a day, and my cat sitting over here watching me is not obligated to prayer 3 times a day. If my cat says those prayers, if women say those prayers, they can't mechayev, they cannot fulfill the obligation of somebody who is more obligated than them. And that is kind of the thing. What are we talking? We're talking about the Baruch, we're talking about Kedusha in the Amidah, and we're talking about Kaddish. So Shir Chadashah, again, went back to the text and the tradition and everything else and said, well, what can we do? Where are the lines? How do we want to do this? And what they said is, okay, women can lead anything that doesn't have one of those 3 in it. So they can lead Sukkot Zimra in the morning, but they can't lead Shacharit, because Shacharit actually has all 3 of those in there. You can lead Torah service, but you can't lead Musaf. Friday night, you can lead Kabbalat Shabbat, but you can't lead Mariv. As far as Torah reading, they said this issue of Kol Isha is BS. It no longer is relevant today, because if you're going to say that in today's world, that a man can't control himself, so a woman has to shut. It just doesn't work in this world today. And Judaism changes. And they're going to say the same thing. I just forgot what the other one was. I'll come back to it. I totally forgot what it was. But they're going to say the same thing about whatever the Kol Isha, Chiyuv, Minyan. All right, we're going to come back to it because I can't remember. And the last piece about Shir Chadashah, they do still have a mechitza, a division between men and women. They are an Orthodox synagogue, but that mechitza is straight down the middle. It's evenly down the middle. Men are on one side, women are on one side. The reading table, they don't have a lectern and a Torah reading table. They just have one table. It's smack in the middle. When they take the Torah out, it goes up one side and comes down the other side. Both men and women, they come to, instead of coming to one side to open the blessing and one side to close the blessing, they stay on their own sides. The whole thing about walking around the shulchan is a modern thing anyway, so it doesn't really matter. So and both men and women read Torah, both men and women do Haftorah and do sermons as well. And during the sermon, they actually open up the curtain. It's a piece of lace. It's about like this. You can completely see through it. It is, if I stand, and I'm 5'4", so it's not particularly high. They needed to maintain the mechitza, but they made it as small, if you will, as they could. So, and they were the ones that really broke this concept. Today we have Kahel, Shir Chadash, Tzion, Beit Kehila, Yedideh. These are all just in Jerusalem. And each one went back to those original conversations and kind of said, oh, that's what she wants. Kind of said, what are the issues and how are we going to deal with them? So Tzion doesn't have a mechitza. Tzion is actually, I would say, much closer to conservative in how they do things than they are to Orthodox. Shir Chadash has a mechitza. HaKahal, I've never been to HaKahal, so I don't actually know. Yedidya has a mechitza, but they have women's minions. If you're having a bat mitzvah, I love this. If you're having a bat mitzvah, the men go into the women's section and the women come into the men's section. And if you're a man who still has a problem with Kol Isha or whatever, then you can go downstairs to the basement and have a men's minyan. And that was how they dealt with it. So there's been a lot of movement and really pushing the envelope. I know in Los Angeles, there was already 20 years ago when I was there, an Orthodox synagogue where he would pass the Torah on both sides. Kanevsky is his name, Rabbi Kanevsky. Women would give the drashot. They had women's minions. They would have bat mitzvahs. Only the girls and the male relatives were, like women and male relatives were allowed. But he was in Los Angeles the real pusher on that. And this is, for the ultra-Orthodox, this is not an acceptable thing, but it's over there. It's not in my neighborhood. My kids aren't doing this. It's not affecting the halachic status of their Jewishness. They may not be davening right, and they may not be good Jews, if you will, but it's not hurting. So for the most part, nobody pays any attention in the ultra-Orthodox world to these kind of women's minions or more empowered or more egalitarian, however you want to define them. Questions on that? Nobody? Wow. Okay. Have you seen this one? The senility prayer? It's not the serenity prayer, it's the senility prayer. Are you guys read it? Okay, the Western Wall. Everybody wants the Western Wall. Just as a review, we are talking about the Western retaining wall of the Temple Mount upon which the temple was built. It is not the Western Wall of the temple. Okay, it is what we see today in most pictures is about the upper 50%. The other 50% is still underground. Just rubble and time and everything have kind of moved that to the wall. So we have three different pieces here. Women of the Wall, specifically egalitarian prayer, which is tied to Women in the Wall, and tied to that also is this new section. Women of the Wall actually started in 1968. So a year after reunification, there is a conference of Jewish feminists in Jerusalem. Not as part of the program, they decide on the last day that they want to go down to the Western Wall as a community to the women's section, or what was kind of the women's half at that point in time, and they want to recite a prayer. We're not talking prayers. They want to say a prayer that they wrote about the welfare of Israel. Okay, so we're not talking about standardized prayer. And then they want to read Torah. And everything was great. They were allowed to stand there, they were allowed to congregate, and then they brought out the Torah. And it didn't go so well at that point. To the extent that there were scenes like this of ultra-Orthodox men and women, both, trying to take the Torah away violently, cursing, screaming. This is kind of still the conversation that sometimes goes on there down today. And it is said that Rabbi Getz, the rabbi of the wall at that point in time, who's in charge of the Western Wall, was standing next to somebody, and this woman reported this to somebody else, and we don't know if it's true. But the story is that Rabbi Getz, when this ultra-Orthodox woman said, "Stop them," the rabbi of the said, "Let them continue. Their service is according to halakha." And he was, whether he was okay with it or not, he didn't see any reason to stop it. Starting in 1948, and really starting because of the response that they received, WOW is formed. Like that anti is really what caused the formation of WOW, of Women of the Wall. And their fight would go on until now. And in different places. They have been in and out of the Supreme Court because they were told, this is another picture of, I don't know if you can see on the right-hand side of that picture, there is a chair in the air flying into the women's section. The two guys on our side are actually police people. They've been detained for wearing talit, wearing tefillin, praying in a group, praying too loud, bringing a Torah scroll in. The current rabbi of the wall, there are about 100 Torah scrolls in the men's section. And the rule is that you can ask for a Torah scroll. Well, don't bother asking because he's not giving you one if you're a woman. So about 4 years ago, maybe, somebody from Europe actually donated a Sefer Torah, a kosher Sefer Torah. It's about this big. It's maybe the size of my head, so that they could hide it. And there are amazing stories of them trying to smuggle in, because it's illegal for them to bring, according to the court, to bring their own Sefer Torah, because there's some there and you can use the ones there. Except for they can't use the ones there, so they try to bring it in. And it's been in and out of court, and basically their rights, for the most part, have been upheld. You're allowed to wear a talit there. You're allowed to create a women's minyan in the women's section. You are allowed to wear tefillin. You can sing. You still cannot legally bring in a Torah scroll. And sometimes they will bring the Torah scroll. There was 1 month they brought it in 3 days early, and then they just kind of had a rotation 24 hours a day where you would keep the Torah scroll hidden in your coat for a couple hours during your shift, and then somebody else would come. And there was, why did I just disappear? Did I disappear from your screens? Oh, there we go. Okay. I didn't touch it. I didn't do it. The challenge is, the law is you can't do anything which goes against the custom of the Western Wall. And we're talking about the traditional Western Wall right now. But what is the custom? They have been davening there every month on Rosh Chodesh since 1988. Is that not custom at this point? The ultra-Orthodox say no, that is not custom. That's wrong. It is the nicest translation of what they say that you can really get. So 2003 rolls around, and the state's finally like, okay, we got to do something about this. And women of the wall are told that they can daven at Robinson's Arch, which, if you're facing the wall, you guys are my screen, you guys are my wall, and I am looking now at the traditional Western Wall. To the right is Robinson's Arch. Same wall, actually lower, which means you're standing on an actual 2,000-year-old street where the level was at that point in time. There's a little piece of an arch left over your head. Daven down there. And this was kind of the conversation, and women of the wall said no, because you have to pay, it's an archaeological site, we can't get in first thing in the morning, all of these reasons. If you give us an equal space, then we will pray in whatever equal space you gave us. And that was the very beginning of the conversation about having an equal space. The conversation never really went anywhere until 2013. In 2013, the committee was created that has Reform, Conservative, Secular, Rabbi Rabinowitz, the Rabbi of the Wall, although he never shows up, and Knesset members all coming together to try to come up with this plan. And they did come up with a plan. And women of the wall said, we will accept your plan. And we waited and we waited and they waited. And the new plaza, which I'll get to in a couple minutes, was built, but it didn't meet the requirements. What were the requirements? It had to be at least the size of the women's section, which is about half, maybe half of the size of the men's section. It couldn't be a little tiny space. It had to be at the same height with the entrance coming in from the Western Wall Plaza, from that big, huge plaza, and it had to reach the Western Wall, i.e., it had to look as important as the women's section. That's really kind of what it boils down to. So if you've been there, it is lower, very small section, in fact, about the size of this bedroom, reaches the actual Western Wall. It is a separate entrance, and it's maybe about half of the women's section, roughly. So it doesn't actually meet any of the requirements.
What?
The women of the wall, most women of the wall, said no thank you. We're going to stay where we are. And that is where this morning they went to daven. Now they daven on the second day of Rosh Chodesh, if there's 2 days, or the first day if there's only 1 day. So this month there's only 1 day. And they daven at 7 a.m. every month. This month, and it was like 11 o'clock last night, a message went out. We want to get there at 6. Because what has happened the last 2 months is that girls yeshivot from all over the country, it's really insane. These girls spend hours on the bus. They get bused into Jerusalem, and they go to the women's section, and they pack the women's section so that there's no room. What they're doing is perfectly legal, especially in the time of COVID, where it's all kind of subdivided and you can only have 10 people in each little subdivision. So there's even less room than normal. And so today, Women of the Wall said, oh, we're just going to go early. Well, the girls were already there. And so they were all the way back in the back of the plaza. And there was some yelling and whistling and all the standard things that go on. I have to say, I've been there. I go when it becomes really a hot political thing to show support. I find it personally very unpleasant. It's incredibly hard to find any concept of davening. These women who are really able to sit there and daven are my heroes just for their ability to shut out everything else that's going around them, including some months a lot of violence. So before I move on to the southern section, I just wanted to share with you this video. This is a Women of the Wall video.
Put on your face. Know your face.
So as they're going through security, everything gets checked to see if there's any tourist holes.
I was checking for.
There's no one knows
That's the Mount Hoffman, if you know her.
if I don't say something, take that drive, little girl. They may see.
This was the month where there were 30 reforming conservative rabbis that brought in Tikvei Torah as well.
I can't keep quiet. No, I can't keep quiet. No,
So she kept the Torah.
Any thoughts?
So we saw the guard trying to wrestle the Torah away from Annette Hoffman. And then later, she still had it. So that's not much of a security presence. They're either not effective or it's just to harass them.
So here's the problem. Part of the security you saw was Israeli border police under the auspices of the state. Part of it is security hired by the Rabbi of the Wall. And it's men and women in that area who are responsible for implementing the rules of Rabbi Rabbinate. You're not allowed to, and that particular person was one of the local guys, not a police person. He shouldn't have been trying to take it away. But when you are that vehemently opposed to what somebody is doing, we all know when we're in a fight or flight that we sometimes do. And you saw him push the woman also. Now, my guess is under normal circumstances, he wouldn't have pushed her. But, and I'm not excusing it in any way whatsoever, but you might have also noticed that he was being surrounded and kind of corralled backwards. And he was trying to do his job as he saw his job. She was able that month to maintain a hold on the Sefer Torah. But you saw what it took. It took her literally being surrounded by other women, and that is not an uncommon. I have been in that situation where we are surrounding, like locking arms, and surrounding whoever's in the center to protect them, to get where they need to go or to do what they are. Yitzhar Katz, who's in the conservative movement, is the leader of the conservative movement, is a big target when he shows up. There are a lot of men that show up, a lot of conservative and reform men. Some of them have wives going down there. A lot of youth groups show up the morning of Rosh Chodesh, and they show up in order to form a barrier around women of the wall, a physical barrier of people, to try to keep mostly kids. We're talking about mostly, the yeshiva girls who are coming in are 18, 20 years old. The yeshiva bachers are down there, they might be early 20s, maybe. And yes, there's adults down there as well. But a lot of it is somebody who, again, not excusing, but maybe isn't quite aware of the fact that everything the rabbi tells them shouldn't be followed black and white from our perspective. So how many feathers did I just ruffle? Nobody's really responding.
Yeah, this is Gail. I just had a question. What exactly is the problem with the Torah again? I know that they're supposed to ask to get a Torah from the other side, but they never give it to them. But what is the problem with women having a Torah or holding a Torah?
Oh, the actual touching of the Torah?
Yeah, the whole thing. What is the whole issue with women in Torah?
If a woman is in the middle of menstruation or hasn't gone to mikvah, even if she isn't menstruating, then there's a concern that she can impurify, I hate that translation, impurify the Torah. Now, the problem with that is nothing can impurify a Torah. You could drag it through a horse corral, and that doesn't impurify it. So it's kind of one of those Baba Mitzvahs that started somewhere probably as a way to stop it and just kept going on and on and on. But that's,
so it's accepted halachically then that a woman cannot impurify a Torah? So, I mean, are the ultra-Orthodox going by halacha or going by the Baba Maisa?
yes. Because for them, the halacha has gained the weight of the Baba Maisa has gained the weight of halacha.
Okay.
Which is like so many other things we do. We don't, chicken, where does chicken fall? Meat, milk, or neither?
Well, we put it with meat.
Okay.
We put it there.
1,000 years ago, we didn't.
Yeah.
And there are reasons why it became meat. But law changes. And a lot of our laws are based on what was happening. If you go back and you really look at a lot of the things we do, why do we light a Chanukiah? Because the people around us were doing a celebration with candles. Same thing with the Christmas tree, by the way. You know, if the rabbis were very smart. If you can't beat them, join them and change the story. Make it your own. So, yes, both. But they really believe that a woman can't touch Torah, that she shouldn't be doing it. And bringing it in is a problem because bringing it in is actually against the law. That is a piece of law because anybody should be able to access one that's already there. But since Rabbi Rabbinate controls who actually can access one, that's not the case.
Okay, thanks.
Other thoughts, questions, queries, concerns?
Well, does it look like this movement is getting stronger? Like they're making any progress? Or is it just going to be this constant fight for years and years, or what?
It kind of comes and goes. Like it like the rest of Jewish history, kind of goes in these waves. That sometimes for like 3, 4, 5 months, it'll really be a hot topic and then it'll disappear for a while. What happened this morning, they had to daven in the back. Also happened last month rather, but they haven't really pushed for that with the advent of COVID going on. You know, everybody's kind of, everybody except for BB perhaps, is taking a step back and saying, okay, we're going to just kind of maintain status quo for the moment and not try to push things through. And they're being respectful of that. The problem is not everybody's respectful of that. The reality is in Israel, the rights of women of the wall to pray in the women's section of the traditional kotel, very few people care. It is not an issue here. Marriage, divorce, kashrut, IDF service, those are issues here. And it's not that it is an issue, but in comparison to the others, it's a very minor issue. Most Israelis don't want to go to the Western Wall anyway, so I don't really care who prays there. Yeah, that's not really right, but I'm not going to get on my horse and ride up there. I'm not sure why he would be riding a horse right now, and stand there, unless something's really going on.
Thanks.
There's a tunnel below ground along the wall, and my wife and I saw women praying underground in the direction of the wall.
Yes. So if you go on the Kotel tunnel tours, which goes from the Kotel Plaza to the north, all the way to the northern corner of the Western Wall itself, you will come to the space which is directly across from where the Holy of Holies sat. The space that we believe is as close as you can get as a Jew and pray. Right? You can get closer, but you're not allowed to pray up on the Temple Mount. And you saw it's I don't know, a yard wide maybe?
Yeah.
You can fit 3 women, you could squeeze in 4 if we're tiny women. And when that became kind of open, it wasn't technically open, but there were a few women that started going there. And they claimed it as their own. And it's fascinating because here it is the closest place. Why are the men on the left and the women on the right in the traditional section? Because the left is closer to where the Holy of Holies was. So they should have the closer space. That's why they're on the left. There's no other reason why left or right. So here it is, if you will, the holiest, closest place is held by these women. And man, if you are a man and you stand there too long and look like you might be davening, they don't let you. They will turn around and say, this is not for you, because they don't want to lose it. And I've never been down there and there's not been somebody praying. Usually Tehillim, usually Psalms, but it's always had people down there. Interesting. The conversation about egalitarian prayer at either Robinson's Arch, it's not really a conversation in the Western Wall Plaza itself, is a very similar conversation. The first one was at the Conservative Convention in 1971. It's the first time that the Masorti or conservative movement went down and prayed in the plaza. And it's been going on and off since then, almost always in the back plaza. I know when I was bringing birthright groups, we would lead prayer back there. For the most part, you get left behind. Once in a while, an individual will come up and say something to you. You can't do it right behind the fence, like right behind the synagogue itself. But if you go to the back of the plaza, for the most part, nobody will bother you. In 1997 on Shavuot, that was a different story. That was similar to Women of the Wall with diapers and yelling and swearing and all of this type. And the police escorts, and this is true also with Women of the Wall, more often when there is a clash between either egalitarian prayer and the ultra-Orthodox or Women of the Wall and the ultra-Orthodox, it is these two groups who are escorted out. because they're the troublemakers. Okay? Even though they're the ones yelling, screaming, and throwing things, we're the troublemakers. So after this in 1997, Tisha B'Av, which about a month and a half later, the police promised protection. Didn't work out so well. You kind of saw there were police there trying to take that Torah scroll, that type of a thing. And that continued on until you got to the Sharansky Commission in 2012-13, 11-12-13, with this new idea of building a third plaza in there. So this is the Robinson's Arch is just here out of the picture. Can you see my arrow?
Yes.
Okay. So Robinson's Arch is just here out of the picture. This is the Roman street, the 2,000-year-old Roman street. This is actually a bar bat mitzvah day. This right here is a table with a Torah scroll on it. There's another one, you can't see it in this picture, but there's another one back here. Up here, there is a wooden platform, and you can see there are umbrellas over it. That is the wooden platform for egalitarian. It's called Ezrat Yisrael, the Israel section. And there's a little tiny platform down here that's right against the Western Wall itself that you can hold one minyan. You can put, if you really squeeze, you could probably put 20 people down there. And it's under the auspices of the Masorti movement, of the conservative movement. You call, you make a reservation. There are Sidurim, there are Torah scrolls. They have umbrellas, they have tables, they have everything you need. If you want something special, you have to bring it yourself. But they have all of the basics that you can do that. So this is what ended up getting built for Women of the Wall. This is a look from the very back of the plaza. Here's your men's section of the traditional, the women's section. This is the bridge going into the Temple Mount. And your mixed section is down here below where we can see. Entrance to those two sections. Entrance to this section is off the picture. You go in, you go down about 2 flights of stairs, you walk along this bridge, and then you're down hidden from sight. Doesn't reach the Western Wall, not the same size, not the same height, not the same entrance. And this is what we still have today. I blogged about this. Actually, if you want to read about this, you can look on my blog about 1.5 years ago. I happened to be walking by the entrance. This is the wooden plaza. And at the entrance, there were like 5 or 6 guards, police, standing there. And they were, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, what's going on? Why are they outside the egalitarian entrance? What's going on? And I happened to be early to meet the people I was guiding. And they went down to the plaza, to this area. And so I followed them down because I was just in one of those moods. And I was raring for a fight, really, is what it was. So I followed them down. I'm like, what's going on? Well, it turns out right over here somewhere, I don't know exactly which one from this picture, one of the stones fell out of the wall. Now, this happens on occasion. All of these big plants, those are caper plants, as in capers that you put on your fish. And the roots of a caper plant will go right through the stone. So it goes through the stone, it weakens the stone, and the stone falls out. There are stones that have fallen out in the other section on a regular basis. It fell out, and there was actually a woman praying 2 yards, maybe, from when this stone fell. It went right through the wood. I mean, we're talking a sizable chunk of stone that fell. So that's what they were all discussing down there, was safety. What were they going to do? This and this. So there were three other tour guides down there at this point in time. So I was sitting with the other tour guides, and we were like, who's going to get blamed for this? Is it going to be the egalitarian Jews, or the Reform Jews, or the secular Jews? This is the Israeli cynicism coming out. Before I left to go meet my tourists, there was an announcement over the radio that because of Reform davening, thank you guys very much, the stone fell out of the wall. You are very, very powerful people.
God's will.
God's will. Paul, you did it. So what they did is they actually came in, and this place right now, it's totally white and beautiful because they cleaned it, they pulled all the plants out, and they strengthened it and everything else. And they're doing the whole section of the wall down there.
Hannah,
So-
I've got a quick question. Could you go back to the last slide, please?
I can.
When I was in, when we were in Israel, the men's section there to the, what would be to my left,
This one?
Yeah,
Okay,
if you go to the left, opposite the women's section.
this way.
Yes,
Okay.
it looked like there was a tunnel there. What was that? I didn't
So-
ignore it when I was davening at the wall. Because I was afraid that if I went down there, somebody would start yelling at me.
No, they wouldn't have. They would welcome you in and ask you if you wanted the lake to fill in. That is actually underneath the old bridge. There's an arch
Yeah.
from the old bridge, and there's a synagogue in there. There's a men's synagogue. If you go through the other door and you go upstairs on top of the bridge, there's a women's synagogue up there.
Ah,
So when it's raining or blistering hot, it's a nice place for you to go as a man. Off of the women's side, there is also a small, you can only fit maybe 3-4 people in it, but there's also a small area in there underneath the Mugrabi ramp that goes up to the Temple Mount.
thank you.
Other thoughts, questions, worries, anger? Nobody's angry yet.
It's not
Okay.
fair.
It's not fair. Oh, you mean this is not fair?
Not
want
being
the
able to, I mean, getting all that hassle for trying to bring a Torah in and read from the Torah.
I have a question. I think you said this already, but I just can't remember. When did the legal, I guess the secular law get passed that it was against the law to have mixed praying, mixed prayer? That's first question. Second question is, how do we find your blog?
Okay, so it's not against the law to have mixed prayer.
Ah.
It is against the custom of the place being the synagogue. That women's section and the men's section, that is a synagogue today. It's classified as a synagogue. The plaza behind it is public space.
Okay.
So the law is you're not allowed to break the peace by doing something which is against the custom of the place.
Okay.
But it's not actually against the law to have a mixed minion, which is good because a lot of us would be arrested.
Okay. Yeah.
I'll just throw in one other piece, which is COVID related. So right now we are allowed to have 19 people for outside davening. You have to social distancing, masks, everything else. And some of the synagogues are kind of following it and sometimes not. And then you go to our Masorti, our conservative synagogue, and we are following it to the letter. You have to sign up to come to services, and if you don't make one of those 19 spots, then too bad. I actually usually write, I'm there through Shacharit. Somebody else can come from Torah service. That's enough for me. If I get there in the morning, I can leave after Shacharit. And the conversation was that we have to be extra careful because if somebody is out checking, there's an excuse to say, look at these Masorti Jews. They're not following the law. Now you can go right around the corner and the Orthodox Jews aren't following the law either, but there's a fear. And that's part of what this whole conversation includes, is that there's a concern over not being fair and that life is not fair. This slide I just put up, these are my understandings. So I just want to put that very clearly. This is how I understand their arguments from their perspective. Not serving any idea, Shabbat, Kashrut in 1947 were about protecting, making sure that they could live the way that they wanted to live. Conversion marriage, Western Wall, even though that wasn't really a conversation down then. Certainly women in prayer was not a conversation in 1947. So conversion and marriage, that was about preserving Judaism, making sure their children could marry our children, vice versa, et cetera, et cetera. Today, there's still absolutely a concept of protection in there, and it's very much going to be determined by who you speak with. But a lot more of it is an attempt to influence the way the country is run. It's not just about protecting immediate ultra-Orthodox. It's about saying, I'm doing it right. You need to do it like me. So it's more in that. And then when we get down to the last two, it's really, there's more about controlling others is much more in that conversation as well. So, oh. I was reading Kenya's text message there and just
Oh,
realized
yes, sorry.
it's okay. Doesn't apply to me. Oh, yes. Thank you, Cindy. That's there. So that's how you can
You're
get
welcome.
money. Other thoughts, questions, queries?
I would like to ask an architecture question. I am rocked by your statement that the western wall is a retaining wall and not the outer wall of the temple. So where was the temple? Was it up above where the mosque is or down below? Or, and how does that relate to Robinson's Arch?
So, okay. This is the western wall. This is my computer. This is the western wall. This is Robinson's Arch area, southern wall. Okay, we good? The temple was exactly where the Dome of the Rock is today. More or less probably at that same height up here. So this was all retaining wall because the land underneath it goes like this. So up at the northern end up here, you're building right on bedrock. But down at the bottom, the walls actually go way down below where we can see so that the walls are going down to bedrock, and then it was all filled in. So they basically, Herod took this mountain that kind of looked like this, and he made it look like this. And this would be the western wall. And then all of this here is filled. There's actually a whole series of arches down here as well. That today, some of them are a mosque. Does that answer the question? Other questions?
Yeah,
Comment.
just a quick one. Yeah, so when we took the tunnel tour a number of years ago, we got to one part and the guide was very emotional and he said, this is actually the wall. This is actually the wall. And so I'm thinking maybe it was that area you were talking about, but it isn't, it's the closest part.
It's the closest. So if the temple is sitting right here, then that little tiny women's section is right here. And the western wall is down here. And Robinson's Arch down here. Robinson's Arch was an archway because this entire section right here, I'm sorry, I don't have a picture for you. This entire section up here was called the Royal Portico. That is where money was changed in teaching and business. This was the business section over here. And Robinson's Arch was simply a way to get to the business section. That was the closest staircase if you were coming from that direction over there.
Okay.
And there's a lot of confusion because it seems like up until possibly even the Crusades, it seems like there was a piece of the western wall of the temple itself which was standing still. And that is what the early literature is actually referring to, was the western wall of the temple itself, of the Holy of Holies even, because it would have been the Holy of Holies. That somehow disappeared. It's unclear when, there's no record of when or anything else, but that it just kind of transferred to the western wall that we have today. And it is, I would say, one of the two biggest misunderstandings that people come to Israel about, that the western wall is just, it's not just, it's 2,000 years old, it's an and has a lot of history, but it's just a retaining wall. I'm allowed to say that.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. No, thanks. It's been wonderful, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You.
Well,
We do get angry. When we see the news about the women at the